Well, welcome, Bill. We're going to do the interview now. I've got, as you know, a lot of questions, so I'm not sure we'll be able to get through them all. But I have obviously no experience doing this stuff, so we'll see what gets through.
All right.
So the first question was, how were you first introduced to computer science, and what was your I don't know, what got you interested in it?
The first time I was exposed to it, I was in 7th grade. And of course, you have to realize this was a different time, right? There was a lot of different stuff going on at that point. I went to a computer science thing on the weekend. I don't know, somebody nominated me to go to this thing. But in those days, the way that you had to do this was you had to go to a particular place and work on a particular computer in a particular lab. And I don't think I really got it. I don't think it really registered because it seemed a little remote and a little vague, and it was a little impractical. But when I got into high school, and started taking courses again, I had a good teacher, which, as we know, can make a difference. And then the other thing that started happening is that computing started to get more personal. So one of the reasons that it didn't make sense maybe before is that go to a place that has the computer and type in the cards and run that was all so far removed. But once we started getting into the age where things started getting more personal, and so it was exciting to see that, but also it was also the advent of some handheld computing devices that started to appear. And so when programmable calculators started to come out, that was the first generation of them, then all of a sudden I got excited because now I could write programs on something that I could take with me. Like, it was portable and it was personal. So now it made a difference because it's like, I can write this code to do this in this class. I can write this code to do this at work. And so all of a sudden it's like, I'm writing code for me because then I can do things. And so I think that's what really gave me the spark, is a great teacher at it. And then also becoming personal, programming becoming personal and useful, I think was really the spark. And then from then, I think I always was in love with programming and computing of various kinds.
Yeah, I was gonna say, having a good teacher obviously is super important, because if you have a good teacher, it really makes everything obviously a lot more fun. But I can't even imagine not having a computer to do stuff on. It's so
ridiculous.
Weird to think that.
Yeah, it was really a ridiculous time to learn computing, and I'm giving away my age because you could almost figure it out by that. But literally, even when I was taking it in high school, to run computers on the big computer, we wrote Fortran programs on a piece of paper on a coding form. And you sent the coding form over to this school, the technical school in town. They would type the cards, they would run the cards through the computer, run the program, wrap up your cards in your output, and send them back. So the cycle of running a program took days. And so, you got really good at being careful at programming, because every time it came back, it was another couple days to do this ridiculous cycle. So it was a silly time to learn it. But as soon as then, like I say, as soon as you start getting calculators, and then of course a little later when personal computers started coming out, then the world started really opening up. And it's like, okay, now I can make money at this. I can sell programs to other people. I can help sell computers to other people. All of a sudden then, the world gets more interesting when a computer can sit on your desk, right? So obviously that was a big move forward.
That seems definitely, I can't imagine saying okay, wait, forgot your comma on line 56. It's too bad. You didn't see you get it wrong. That would be pretty awful.
Yeah, and I think the teacher even graded, every time you had to send it back, you got a little ding.
Oh,
so
wow.
you really wanted to be careful. And so the whole idea of desk checking your code, which isn't a term you even hear anymore, yes, check it with your eyeballs, make sure it's right. That became an important thing. So it was a strange introduction. And I think I was going to get out my keepsake box. I've got it over here, but I didn't dig out my first programmable calculator, which is still my memento. I don't know that it could power up anymore, but it was pretty meaningful, right?
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't realize how. Obviously I had to start at some point, but I didn't really think about that.
Yeah, and those calculators started coming out with a little metal, metal oxide strip where you could record your programs on a something that was a little more permanent. So the calculator wouldn't save the program, but you could write it onto this little magnetic strip, and then you could load it back. So it's like, oh, now we have storage, right? It all seems very silly in retrospect, but it got me excited. So that was that was worth it, I guess.
That's interesting. Well, my second question is, what was your academic background? How do you do you finish college, or what's the deal with that?
Yeah, I started, for some reason, it didn't occur to me to start computer science right away. I don't know why that was. I think I thought, well, I think I have good grades. Maybe I should do something else. So I actually went down a couple other paths before I settled on computers. And then finally, that was very clear that that was the thing. So I don't know why it took me so long. So, but yeah, I got an undergraduate degree. And in those days, the degree I got was actually computer science business, which was odd because you took computer science classes, but you also had to take some finance and some econ, and it was a little bit of an odd mix of things, but definitely it had a computer science flavor, and you were still doing compiler construction and database stuff, and like it was an interesting mix, I guess. But yeah, I got the undergraduate degree, and then I went to work at Microsoft, and during my time at Microsoft, I decided to go back and get my master's degree. So I went to Seattle University. Thank you, Microsoft, for footing the bill for that education. And then I got my master's degree in software engineering, an MSE, Master of Software Engineering, and that was gosh, 1995, I guess. So it was a few years later, but yeah.
Huh.
So that's what I have academically, yeah, under my belt.
That's interesting. Yeah. So well, then that's the third question. Like, what positions in the industry have you held? So obviously you've gone to Microsoft, right?
Microsoft was my main technical thing. I did have some other jobs in my hometown where I was, like I said, maybe helping to sell hardware, or doing consulting where I was writing code for people or writing spreadsheet macros for people or helping them learn things. So I did have some other little minor things, but my main technical position was at Microsoft. And I worked there for about 7.5 years and then took a bit of a break. And then I came back and worked for 8 more years. So I would say that in general, Microsoft was kind of my thing, right? That was my main technical interest through that time. And I got excited, because when I was selling computers and working in that, first days of personal computing, Microsoft software caught my attention. So I really got interested in Microsoft Word, and I saw the beginnings of some of their stuff, and I kind of said, well, this Microsoft company is kind of interesting. I found out that I had a friend who had a girlfriend who had a friend who worked there, like it was a third person, fourth person kind of deal. But I was talking to them, and they hooked me up with an interview, and by her recommending me, I got the interview, and I got called up and came to Redmond to interview in 1991. And got hired at Microsoft. So I got into the sort of the testing field, in the engineering side, in the testing field first. So that was my start.
Interesting. And you say you worked on. Cause I remember when I was taking your class, you showed us like a lot of tricks with Word and stuff. So you worked on Word mostly, right?
Not all of that time, but yeah, Word was a big thing. I started in Word and I actually ended in Word. And then I worked on a few other groups in between. And I also worked in an education group. They were forming an education group, and they didn't have anybody that was really spearheading tester education. So I came in and was teaching testing courses and kind of coordinating all of that and making sure testers were getting what they needed to grow and learn and do their jobs better. So it was partly education. A little bit of the time was that, but a lot of it was technical stuff. Word, I worked for a while. We had our own little clip art gallery program some years ago. We had our own content. So Microsoft actually bought content and managed the content. And I worked in a group that managed and tagged and had all of these images and stuff that Microsoft bought. And so, for a while I worked with that group. So it was a few things in there, but Word was more my core thing most of that time. Also Works for a little bit of time. Microsoft Works for a tiny bit. Yeah.
It's funny you mentioned that clip art because I totally remember using clip art when I was I was a lot younger. I just remember going and getting the clip art and finding it and putting in. That's so weird. You said that. I forgot about that, but as soon as you mentioned that, I'm like, oh yeah, that's weird.
Yeah. So that was fun. Those were fun days. Yeah.
Well then this is a more important question, but what led to your current position as a teacher? Like how did you become a teacher?
I guess teaching is in my blood. I was my first grade teacher, who I knew until she lived to 95 or near 100 years old, and I was still kind of in touch with her. My first grade teacher said I was trying to teach then, that I was a little bit ahead in reading. I was very lucky that I had people in my life, my grandmother especially, who was teaching me to read when I was very, very young. And so I came to first grade, I think, already ahead. I was already, reading. So that's kind of the main thing. And so my first grade teacher says I was trying to teach and mentor and help because I would see other kids who were struggling with reading, and I really wanted to help them get on board and get to it. So I guess it's always been there. The other, examples were like in my in high school, again, I had this great teacher, but she left, she retired. And then we had a really bad teacher come in. She was very nice. She just didn't know anything about computers. And so I would go to the other teacher's house and learn stuff about computing, about programming. And then I would come teach the rest of the class about how to do certain things on the computer. So I was sort of teaching computing in high school in small ways. I mean, these are all tiny things. So it all kind of worked out. I've always gone back and forth between teaching. When I worked at Microsoft, even in early days, I would always come teach part-time, for instance, and that's where I got into teaching at North, right? Is I would come teach part-time, and I was teaching testing, and I was teaching, applications. I taught Excel classes. I taught Outlook. I taught programming, like all kinds of things. And so and then I worked at Microsoft and sometimes in teaching. So it's always been part of my career, right? I've always made time to do that. And so when I then retired from Microsoft the last time, and I guess the final time, then I decided after a few years, like, yeah, I'm gonna want to teach. I always want to teach something. And then that led to me saying, if I'm going to teach something, then might as well teach full time. Let's give that a try for a while. So that's how I arrived at the current moment in which I am now a tenured, on my way to being hopefully tenured. I'm a probationary instructor heading toward that. But yeah, teaching's always been a thing for me. So that's, it was natural. And since I had a good long relationship with North, I decided it was good time to go ahead and take the plunge and maybe teach a little more, because it's fun. The students are fun. They're energetic. They love what's going on. They provide a lot of energy to me, and a lot of, that makes me happy and makes me, feeds a lot of energy back into me when I see that they're grabbing this stuff and having fun and enjoying themselves and learning a lot. So yeah.
Yeah, I just want to say that one thing I'd say is that your class is definitely the one I've seen the most on Discord. Like every other class I've gone to, they don't talk on Discord much, but your class is always, at least when I did it, and it seems like Renee's class as well, everyone's talking, always like working and helping each other, which is really interesting because there's not, it's weird. I don't know what you do specifically, but definitely the energy you provide makes people definitely want to work together and talk, which is really interesting.
That's cool. Yeah. And I think sometimes my assignments are a little bit more challenging than some other teachers give. So it might be that it's kind of required too, that you have to band together and see what you can do to support each other. But that either way it happens, that's okay, right?
Yeah, I always found Discord really helpful. But that goes to my next question, is that when I at least took your class, it was very different than a lot of instructors. Like you very said, everyone joining the Discord, you should talk to each other, you should help each other. That's a common thing. Totally like work together on the projects. And there was a lot of I felt like it was pretty different than a lot of teachers. So the next question is that how would you say your approach is different than a lot of other teachers, for anyone who doesn't know?
Well, sometimes it's a little hard to know because it's not like we get to see other teachers teach.
Yeah.
So unless we're sitting in a tenure, unless we're on their tenure committee and we get to watch them teach, I have a very limited amount of knowledge about how other people do things. I do know that based on the sort of vibe, I know that I'm probably very similar to Barb Goldner in some ways, but most people have never had an in-person class with her. So they may know her from online, but so it's very hard to measure that. One thing that I do is and I can't, again, it's hard for me to measure. I'm just saying how I think about things. I don't treat community college like it's high school part 2. I figure in community college, especially with classes like we're doing that have to transfer to a university, you have to learn the stuff, right? You can't baby everyone, and you can't, everybody has to learn this stuff because they're going to have a challenge when they get to university, to like UW if they transfer. So we have to sort of do this stuff. We have to learn and grow together, right? So I think one thing that I don't mind challenging students, right? And because I think they rise to the challenge, right? Most of the time, especially those who are eager and have aptitude, like they're going to rise to that challenge. They're going to figure it out, and I'll give you more help if you need. But like, let's do the real stuff, folks, right? Let's be realistic. Let's do what you need to do to prepare for the industry. Let's not baby you, because you get onto a job that is not going to help you. You go to a job interview that is not going to be of benefit. So like, let's do the real world stuff. Let's talk the real stuff. Let's not baby you and just do academic silliness, right? Let's let's just get in there and do it. And then everybody, I think, benefits. And I love when students come back to me later and say, I remember your class because when I got out to work, like a student said, I just got a job as an engineer at Facebook or something. And your class, because you did X and Y and Z, it was a lot more of a real world thing. And I felt like that really helped me to get this job. So when you hear that stuff coming back, you're like, yep, that's the way to do it, is try to get real world, try to get honest with what life is going to be like in the industry and things like that.
Yeah, so that's kind of answers another one of my questions, because if you, I obviously, now you say that kind of makes sense, like you don't know exactly how other teachers teach, but for me personally, I felt like your classes were a lot more, there was not as much focus on tests, which some teachers really like to do a lot of tests, and there was a lot of focus on doing the projects. And you also, another thing is you had a lot of extra credit compared to a lot of teachers, and I felt like if you wanted to get a good grade, you put in that extra time, did the extra credit, it was not, like you'd have to work for it, like it wasn't easy, but like you could, if you really wanted to, there was not as much luck involved as a lot of the classes to get a high grade. There was actually very little.
Yeah, and frankly, I think projects, if we could make sure that everybody always did their own work, then projects would be all we would do, pretty much.
Yeah.
Because that's the best way to prove you can program, is to program, right? So tests are almost a necessary evil, because sometimes you have to have a controlled environment where at least you know that they have done that on their own. Even though on Zoom that becomes kind of silly because it's hard to know people do it on their own. But in the classroom, it's like, okay, you have pencil and paper, or you have your computer, and it has to be you. So it gives us another data point that we may not be able to guarantee through projects. And then, yeah, the extra credit, I had some of the teachers who sat in my tenure committee said, they commented on this. They said, your extra credit is really hard for the amount of points that you get for it, right? Like you have to work for that extra credit. But he liked that. He says, like, yeah, because it's the people who really are interested who are going to do that work. And they don't almost care that it's just a little bit of points. They're going to go for it because they want to learn. And so, yes, you can get the extra credit, but you're going to really dig in. It's not silly extra credit either. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, because at least for me, I haven't taken like a ton of classes, but I found that very few teachers offer, like, it was like 50-50 offer extra credit. And it was like not definitely the easiest, but it was like, there was a decent amount, and I felt like it was kind of hard, but it was like, it was worth the benefit, at least to me. So I really appreciated the extra credit. I think that was really good.
And I think, it makes sense. And, for all of the sort of, talk about, like, I have a challenging class, frankly, my grades are really good. Like, people make good grades in the class. Some people don't, of course, but if you looked at the averages, like, there are plenty of 4.0s in my classes. So it's not like people don't come out okay in the end, right?
Yeah, I would say if you want to work hard, you can definitely get a 4.0. The other question I had was, what's the most important concept or skills that you think your students take away? Like, if you could choose like one thing, like, oh, this is the thing that you find most useful, what would it be?
I think it's different in different courses, but I think if you've done the whole series, I want to think that design is one thing that I think is super important for people to think about. Because if we're not careful in academia, we give little bite-sized toy problems. Like, there are some instructors who even in 143 really focus on practice it or something like that. And I don't think that that's a real world thing. So I want people to understand that, yeah, in the world, projects are big, but I don't want you to be afraid of that. Like, we can think about big stuff and we can architect our projects. And then once you do all that interesting thinking, which we are capable of, then the coding part is the coding part, right? But learning to think bigger is probably the most important thing, is to sort of raise our consciousness, our meta thinking about programming, to think about design and to think about options and to think about why we make decisions, right? To sort of be informed about these things and make good decisions. So that's probably one of the bigger things, at least from the advanced classes, right? And then the other overriding one is just to think, right? You don't want to automatically do anything. You always want to think, why did I do this? Why is this the right choice? In every circumstance, it's not that you have to do X or Y. There's usually a choice. And how do we make it? How can we be smart about and informed about those choices?
Yeah, I was saying, like, the thing, definitely, I think you definitely said to do this, but like if you did the object diagram, you actually understood what's going on. The program part, it was like a lot of work, but it wasn't that hard. Like, just kind of crank through it. You got the object diagram. If you get confused, just fall back on that. Kind of just do it. As long as you get the design down, it's a lot easier for everything else.
Right, and that's why, in spite of the fact that, especially in past quarters, I've simplified these a little bit, but probably in your quarter, some of these projects for 143 were quite large, right? They were substantial with a lot of model to them, but yet students come out of 143 sometimes saying 143 was easier than 142. even though my program, I'm writing 10 times more code. But, once I understand how to architect it and put it all together, the rest is just code. And I can write just code all day long. Like once I understand how and why and how it works together, I can write code all day to match that. And that then becomes easier, and that starts feeling like real programming work to me.
Yeah, I definitely would say it was a lot easier to do this 143 versus 142. Just like after with the designs, especially like more work, but it was like, okay, I know I'll be able to do this. Like it's gonna be a lot of work, but like can just crank through it, and like if you understand, it's gonna be fine.
Yeah, and frankly, when you get out into the world, that's going to be one of your hardest challenges, is that you get thrown into a group with a project that's been ongoing for many years. And so the architecture that's already there when you enter the door can be just overwhelming. And if you have never worked on projects that were substantial, then that might just scare the heck out of you, and you start thinking, I can't do this, like I'm incapable. No, you're certainly capable. It's a big thing. You got to learn about the pieces. Maybe it's hard and it's got a lot of stuff, but then you relax and you go, I will learn this architecture. I will figure out what this is, and I will find where I fit into it. And it just keeps you from being quite so scared. And I think that's a big thing.
Yeah, obviously I don't have a job, but I feel like it would prepare me if I did. So we kind of touched on this a little bit, but how has teaching virtually impacted your classes? Like, do you think it's helped it, or do you think it's hurt it, or like, what do you like about it more than in person?
At the beginning, I guess all of us were very wary, but I kind of felt like we could make, like, especially in computer science, we could actually make this transition a lot easier than others. So I know some of my other colleagues in the department or in the division, like math teachers, people who would come in with a piece of paper every day for their students to work on and things like that. I knew some of those were going to have a very, very bad time. So I felt sorry for them. For us, in some ways, it's like, well, I'd never used Zoom before. Okay, it's just tech. We can make this happen. And, it seemed like it actually went pretty smooth. In fact, Hardy was with me, and I think maybe Kristen, in literally the quarter that we switched over. And so I think it worked amazingly well for computer science because people have their computers at home. They can sit there, they can be on Zoom, they can work along with me. And we figured out how to use some of the tech, like, okay, breakout rooms do this and we can do this. And as long as you can figure out sort of how to juggle the tech, and that's one of the challenges, right? Okay, I've got slides, I've got recordings, I've got programs that I want to type, I got notepad windows. And so if you can figure out all of that, all of those little pieces and manage that slight chaos that goes on there, and that, to me, that was really the only big challenge at the beginning, was like, okay, how am I going to juggle and get everything smooth and not make it seem like I don't know what I'm doing, right? And then you realize, yep, I can show my code, I can show I can show the slides, we can go to breakout rooms, and some things are better, right? Like breakout rooms actually work better because in the classroom, I can send everybody to different corners of the room. That's not the same thing, right? Here's a marker, go to the corner and talk. It's not the same thing as a breakout room where everybody can share a screen. And so, I think as a whole, I've been very pleased with how the virtual stuff went, and the student comments have been really quite positive that they didn't think they suffered. And in fact, some say they think they came out ahead with the virtual stuff over what in person would have been. So we got lucky, and I think, luckily we had the tech behind us and then learning how to do this stuff. And it seemed to work kind of well. I was surprised.
Yeah, I think I think in computer science also, obviously it lends itself a lot better to computer science than like writing or something. Well, writing is a little bit easier, but like certain classes a lot more different than computer science. I think for computer science it's very similar, like same kind of environment, and it helps in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, and I think also, I mean, even if we had only done it for a quarter or two, now we're like old pros, or we should be at this point. But now we also have a test run to say, okay, once we go back to the classroom, let's say somebody gets COVID and they shut down the classroom for a week or whatever, we know exactly what to do. Or, we have a snow day, or, maybe if the school cancels class, maybe we don't have class, but maybe we do, or maybe I can't get out of Issaquah and I have to say, okay, we're just going to be virtual today. So it gives us a fallback that even once we're there, we have sort of different modalities to try. Maybe we can offer some classes in person, some virtual, some hybrid, some online, like all of these things can work, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because so like, honestly, would you prefer to do online or in person? Like, which one do you think would you like more personally?
I don't know. I mean, it's nice to see faces. It's nice to be, there's something nice about being in the classroom, right? There's something more personal about it. But in truth, I don't know. It's a pretty darn hard call. Am I looking forward to at least an hour and a half or 2 hours of more than 2 hours, more like 2.5 hours of commuting every day? No. Is that going to be fun? Nope. So there's certain things that I would say, yeah, that might be kind of convenient to just sit here at my desk. But yeah, seeing people's faces and working with people individually, we all kind of miss that, I think. So it's
Yeah,
a
that
very
does seem like it would be more fun. Well, here's a fun question. What are your other hobbies besides computer science? Like, what do you like doing besides computer science?
Well, you see some of my hobbies in the background here. Here's a piano that barely gets touched, but I played the piano when I was quite young, and took some more piano through various years. So I sometimes play, although not very much now. I was also a singer. I sang with the Seattle Choral Company. I did barbershop for a while. And so I have had, quite a few years of singing, although I haven't done that in a while either. So yeah, music is kind of a big one. I like listening to music as well. I have eclectic music tastes, but yeah, probably music is one of the biggest ones. I'm also sometimes a baker, so in-person classes would sometimes benefit from homemade treats if I just felt like baking. So here's cupcakes by surprise, or we're doing the end of quarter celebration. Let's have some cupcakes, or let's have something. So that's always kind of fun too. And some of it, has anybody who's on here benefited? Was anybody around when they actually got treats, homemade treats? I don't know if during those quarters we would have gotten those.
Hardy said I think he got it.
You did get some. Okay, yeah. So you guys did get some during that time before we got into COVID days and had to stop. Yeah.
Yeah, that definitely sounds like a lot more fun to get some baked goods than just sit at home in the camera. But I don't know. That's COVID. That's what happened with COVID.
That's what.
Yeah, COVID stuff. It's not easiest, but I feel like your class and you have been pretty easy, translated pretty well to online, as we talked about. But here's another question. This is from the Discord, so this is some questions that some people asked. They said, do professors discuss Rate My Professor reviews among each other for fun? Do they have any issues with Rate My Professor? Like, do you have any problems?
Yeah, so I don't think that I have been part of those kinds of discussions. I'm aware of Rate My Professors. I've looked at it occasionally, but I haven't been part of people sitting around talking about that. But I'm sure it does happen, right? I'm sure they do that, and not just for fun too. It's really an interesting kind of platform, and one of the things that I think it may tilt slightly toward the disgruntled, because if you're upset about something, you're more likely to be drawn to a platform like that, to some sort of social media way to say it. I think it's probably less likely that students who loved it would think to go do that, but they might. So yeah, it's a really interesting thing, and I don't know how accurate. I mean, I don't have the highest rating of any professors on that site, certainly, but the comments there are also really interesting to read. The other thing is sometimes people will say things as they are stating it as a negative, but I actually read a positive out of it. And my favorite one of that is that somebody said, they obviously were disgruntled. They said, he makes it seem like software development is not easy money. And I thought, well, then they got their money's worth of the course. Whatever they paid, they got their money's worth if they learned that fact, because it is not easy money. It's hard work. It's very hard work. It's a hard field, rewarding and fun, and some of us love it. But if you go into it thinking it's going to be easy money and you're just going into it because you think you can make a good living, not going to work, right? Not going to be a good plan for you. So sometimes you read stuff like that and you go, yep, I'll take that. I'll take that feedback. And I think it was exactly the right thing there.
Yeah, that is interesting, because I don't know, obviously I haven't had a job. Feels weird that you would be doing something just because it's easy money. Like, I mean, that seems like, I don't know, kind of not a good idea.
Yeah, and we do see people who sometimes it's clear by the way they come into the classes that that's what they think, that somebody has told them, if you get a programming degree, you will make money. No, not really. I've had students who struggle and just fight, and you talk to them and you try to counsel them. And it's not that I try to steer them away, but I have to say, look, at some point you have to look at your aptitude and see if it's a good match for the field. And if it's not that it doesn't mean you're not smart. It just means that maybe this isn't the thing for you. And some people still push back and say, no, my parents still said I have to do this. My counselor said I have to get this job. I have to get this degree. And I think I'm really sorry that they feel that way about their life, because I don't think it's going to work that way for them. But, hard.
Yeah, that's definitely, I don't know. I feel like all jobs, if you want to do it at a higher level, it's going to be hard. Like, you can't just think it's easy and just like, that's good. It's going to be a lot of effort.
Yeah, and there's good money to be made, but also there's a lot of different levels at which programmers can work, right? So, if you want to be an entry level, data processing type programmer and not make a ton of money, you can probably find a job doing that, right? It's going to be less stress. You're not going to get paid a whole lot of money, but it might be just a job where you can kind of slog through it and maybe just do kind of baseline programming, database, maybe some little bits of user interface. Yeah, that's one kind of job. But do you want that job, or do you want a job where you're going to be able to advance, you're going to be able to contribute at a higher level, you're going to get into a leadership position, or a position where you can influence the product more? Like, which kind of job do you want, right? You got to set your sights properly for what your skill set is. And, you want that higher paying job, you're going to have a better education, and you're going to have to be smarter, and you're going to have to be more prepared.
Yeah, because you always hear about in the news those game developers, like it's very competitive to get in. So like you get paid very little money and you just do a lot of work. And it's like, I don't know, if you love game development, it might be worth it, but it seems like it's tough. Like, you can't not just like, oh, you just make $1 million a year for just doing nothing. Like, it's just a lot of work.
Yeah, and especially when you talk about startups, right? You can get into a startup and you're going to work your butt off in a startup, and maybe you'll get lucky and it becomes the next big thing, or really takes off, and maybe you'll get a share of those profits. But if you're going to become a millionaire, it's probably half because of luck, right? Because you happen to choose the right company, and that company happened to make the right decisions, and something went well. Just as likely that you're in a startup and you work really hard and then the company stops and closes down, and then you find something else. But you learn and you grow, and it's not always an easy field. Yeah. But some of us, it's like a lot of other fields. It's like an artist when you say, why do you paint? And they say, because I can't not paint, right? I can't not program. It's in my, it's in my system. It's something that I want to do. I'm going to program, right? It's nice if I can get paid for it, right?
But you're going to do it anyways.
Yeah, I'm gonna play with it anyway. So yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. But so I got another question. They said this is I'm just going to quote it directly. It says, among student circles, the word is already getting around that you're a good teacher. Is it obvious that you put much work and effort compared to most teachers? Does this elevate you, or does it add pressure? What drives you to do this for us?
It's both, but it's pressure that I put on myself. It's not something that's forced on me that others say I have to do. I don't know exactly where it all comes from, but I guess I just want to do the thing that I guess I would want my teachers to do. Right? What did my best teachers do? They invested in me. They encouraged me. They did above and beyond what I would expect. Like, I could go to this teacher's house and she would teach me things. She was not being paid to teach me computer science on the side. So teachers who really made an extra investment in me, and I knew that they were, that was not their job to necessarily, they weren't paid to specifically help me that way. So I guess I just was, I grew up with some teachers that really took that kind of interest and made that kind of investment. So to me, it just seems like something that a teacher should do, right? That's just part of good teaching to me, is making that investment, supporting students, responding. Some teachers say, and I completely understand this, you really should unplug on the weekend. You really shouldn't be answering emails on the weekend. You really shouldn't be, putting yourself out there quite as much, because it does take time and all of that. Yep, I completely understand that, and I agree that that's probably a good thing to do. But when people are stuck, when people need help, what are you going to do? I don't want you to be knocking your head on the keyboard all weekend long and not getting anywhere and be frustrated. So it's kind of a thing that you have to balance. But it, like I said, it is pressure I put on myself, but I also enjoy it, right? I mean, this is also a social outlet for me. So, even though it's not like we're all going out drinking together, that we're that kind of a group, it's still a social thing. And so it's nice to have that interaction. It's nice to to support students, but it just seems like the right thing to do, right? I just teach the way it seems right. I never had any formal education in teaching, not one class. And I had a boss one time that said, after coming to my class and sitting in, he said, never take an education class. He said, you know what's right and you do the natural thing. Don't take any more education, right? Don't take any education classes. And I thought that was really strange, but it's like, if you got the groove, you got the groove, right? If you know how to watch for the signs and pay attention and, incorporate the things that you need to, does somebody really have to teach you the theory, or do you just sort of know that that's the right thing that feels right,
That's really interesting. I totally thought you were like took a lot of teaching classes, because you were very good at explaining exactly. Like whenever after your lectures, I was never like, I got to think about that. That's hard. Just like you explain it and I would get it. It was like, okay, yeah, that's perfect. I might even like rewatch some part if I wasn't paying full attention. But if you explained it and it was good. Like I was never confused with anything. So that's really interesting that you never took any classes.
Yeah, and I think, again, with that stuff, you start learning. Again, you have to pay attention, right? I mean, like anything, you have to pay attention in life to be able to grow. You can't just do the same thing over and over. So you watch what stuff works and you keep doing that. And also you just think about, like, everybody does better with an analogy, right? Everybody locks into a concept if you can think of the perfect analogy. And so especially when you're teaching beginner students, like the fact that I spend a lot of time trying to figure out, how do I teach something? How do you teach repetition? How do you teach the idea of this or that? And so coming up with some really, bear goggles, exactly, right? Coming up with these analogies can really lock things in. And so to me, that's a lot of what is good teaching, is locking into things that they understand in the world, because none of this stuff was made up in a vacuum, right? None of it's arbitrary. It all exists for a really specific reason. And it's like, if you can hold your head a certain way, you can probably see it. And if somebody can bring it to light in a certain way with a certain analogy to help you kind of get your head oriented, I think that is a really powerful thing. So yeah, analogies and explanations in a way that makes sense, in a logical, stepwise progression. Also creating an appetite for the next topic. You know how we did this, but we could never figure out how to do this thing. What if we could now learn a way to do this thing? And now everybody's already ready, because we had the appetite from the last project, and now we're ready to satisfy the appetite with the new project. So, sort of figuring out a way to build that, build the arc of the quarter in a way that kept that excitement going and kept you feeling like you needed the next thing, right? You really wanted it, and it was necessary, because that was the proper sequence, right? So a lot of that's just figuring out the proper ways to sequence and introduce and whet the appetite and tease the ideas and all that kind of stuff. Yeah,
that's interesting. Yeah, because that, I think like you said, showing real life example, or saying, like, showing you why you would want to do this is very effective to learn. Because a lot of times we're like, this is how you do it. I'm like, well, why would I want to do that again? Like, seems kind of like pointless. But then you're always like, okay, this is why you'd want to do it. This, like you did in the last project, you could see this was not super effective. If you do it this way, it's a lot better. And the only thing I want to mention, because we talked about it a little while, but your emails, I want to say you always responded within like 10 minutes of me sending an email. And I think all students really appreciate that, because sometimes teachers don't respond for like a week. And it's like, well, I mean, if you take a couple of days, it's fine, but it's a week. It's like, I mean, I kind of need a response. And so everyone really appreciates that.
And if you got responses in 10 minutes, you were just lucky, right? Because sometimes I just happen to be at the right place at the right time. So, we get lucky. But, while I'm answering a question you didn't answer or you didn't ask, one of my pet peeves about teaching is unresponsiveness, right? Where students ask a question, they need something, and then you just leave them hang to dry. Now, sometimes there's a little benefit in waiting a little bit, because sometimes they figure out their own problem. So if they can get you every second of the day, that's not to their best interest, right? So that's one thing. But yeah, unresponsiveness is one pet peeve. Another one is taking a really long time to grade stuff. Right? Because I hated that in my college experience, where we would turn in a paper and then it would be the whole quarter or halfway through the semester would go by, and then finally you'd get your paper back, right? And so it would take all these weeks, and that just didn't seem good. And along those same lines, one of the same teachers I'm thinking of, you'd get this long, you'd type this long paper, right? You create this long paper, and you would get on the top of the paper a grade. Not one mark, not one comment, nothing to support why you got the grade that you got. Just, here's your grade, right? And so
that's terrible for learning. I mean, you can't tell.
Peeve of mine. And of course, when you have a really bad teacher, then you want to be a really good teacher, right? Then you want to say, okay, I'm never going to do that thing. 1 week maximum, right? I'm going to try to get them all back in a week, or, so part of it's, again, you pay attention to what goes on in the world, you pay attention to what doesn't work, and then you try to respond with the other side and say, yep, got to get the grades back, you got to give a good amount of feedback, right? You got to do those things so students feel they get what they need.
That was, yeah, you always grade your stuff pretty very quickly, and like it's like, oh, it's just like, oh yeah, Bill will grade that, and I'll get my answer in a reasonable amount of time. There's no like waiting, because some of the teachers like take like a month. It's like, okay, well, come on, I kind of need to know to see what I need to get.
Well, yeah, and if you're trying to plan your quarter and see how things are going, and am I working on the right, am I going in the right direction? Then it takes months, months to get your stuff back. How do you know you lost that time not really understanding how to do better, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we do have another question, and they're asking, what concepts or tools do you think students should bring to their first class, like your first 101 class or 142? Like, what do you think if you want to get extra prepared, what do you think people should know?
Well, are you talking about like coming into a 110 class, like literally the first one, or is it? I
think it's 110. They said 110 or 142, but I'm pretty sure I think this is mostly for like people who've never taken to 110. So I would say 110.
Yeah, and we don't really expect a lot. We don't really expect people to come in with any programming knowledge. I think basic computer use is really good. Knowing how to manipulate, use the operating system and manipulate files and understand just the basic stuff of what goes on with just working with the computer is really kind of enough stuff. I hate to tell people go learn about programming before you learn to program, because what do you tell them? Where do they look? Where do they go? I love it when people come in with just natural curiosity, right? When it's almost better that they know their math, right? That they understand math well and symbolic logic that goes along with that. You don't have to show up with a lot of prep. You just have to show up with enthusiasm and curiosity and natural problem solving. People who love puzzles and problems do really well, right? Usually at programming. So it's pretty hard to say what to do before you take that very first class, right?
Yeah, because I skipped the first one, because I was like, I already know this stuff. But basically, if I was for 142 at least, if you kind of know for loops, if statements, while loops, and like some other really basic stuff, it was like the first class just really covers the really basic stuff. Like if you know what program is, you should be pretty comfortable.
Yeah, and if you want to do a little exploration like that, it's almost like I'd almost rather that they go learn some fun kind of programming silliness thing, right? I mean, programming, mods, people come in with some ideas about that there are mods in the gaming world, or, sometimes they come in with stuff from interesting angles, but just knowing that those things exist and they're excited about them can be a big deal.
Yeah, that's good. So another question from Discord, someone asked, you're a 22-year-old student today and graduating tomorrow morning with a general degree in computer science. What field would you apply to today, and what masters would you take down the road?
Yeah, and CS really prepares you for, I think, normal programming jobs in a lot of companies, right? A plain computer science degree is what they're looking for at a lot of the big companies, a place like Microsoft, the Googles, the Facebooks, things like that. They like a CS degree. They might take something else. They might take engineering. They might accept math, although they like a computer science degree. So I think for a lot of the sort of standard companies that work in, especially the ones whose software is more of the the nature of old style coding, where it's written in C, it's written in whatever kind of stuff like that. That's a really good entree into those kinds of companies that are substantial, because a lot of their code base is in those standard kinds of languages, and they don't have an expectation that you come in with full stack and crazy stuff like that. But yeah, you can apply for a lot of the standard company jobs with just that CS degree and nothing else. The interesting question then is a master's degree even something that you want? At Microsoft, it wasn't particularly valued, right? So people did come in with a master's degree, but they almost did worse in some ways because they were farther removed from the actual coding stuff. And sometimes they had developed their own mindset about things that didn't really match the company's, or they talked a lot, they got into sort of this academic master speak, and you're like, yeah, I don't think I want to work with this guy, right? It's like, nope, a lot of bluster, not so much knowledge, right? So I'm not sure the master's degree is something that you want right away. Frankly, I went back and got it for the teaching thing, right? Because I thought, if I'm going to be a teacher, I don't want anybody to ask. Like, do I need to go back? Am I worried about getting the master's? I just wanted to have it so that if I wanted to teach in a a 2-year college kind of environment, I could just get it. Would it have been worth it for my career? No. I wouldn't have
Huh.
done any better at Microsoft with a master's degree than I would have without it. It wouldn't have helped me a bit.
That is
Now,
interesting.
MBA, some people go get an MBA, right? Because now they want to go into the business side and they want more knowledge. So sometimes people sort of cross-pollinate across different fields. But yeah, the master's is not completely a clear path for plain computer science. Now, maybe there are going to be some more esoteric fields, right? There are going to be some fields that get much more into mathematics or much more into design of computers and things like that, where maybe the master's would bring that stuff to bear. But plain old CS in a normal programming job, I don't know.
Huh, that's interesting. You always think being a master's would always be like always better, but sounds like kind of like it doesn't help you if you're just doing the normal like logic stuff. It just
Yeah,
gets
and
too
yeah,
involved.
and that may be different in different companies, but did I learn a lot of stuff in my master's that was immediately applicable to what I was doing at Microsoft? Yeah, I took some documentation and sort of process courses that were interesting. Frankly, some of the business courses were more interesting, like business communication. You wouldn't think that a business communication course would be a big deal, but it's a big deal because you've always got to communicate, and learning how to do it concisely, right? And write well and be concise was actually a big deal. But we took things with 3D figures and figure rotation. Yeah, it's interesting math and it's good stuff. Am I doing that for a job? No. If you're going to be in gaming, maybe, right? Maybe I wanted that. So I'm not saying it's always a bad idea. I'm just saying for most standard programming jobs, it's probably overkill for getting a starting job.
Huh, that's interesting. I didn't really think about that, but that's a good idea. Well, this is kind of a little bit related, but what do you find most rewarding as a computer programmer? Like, what do you find like, oh, this is my favorite thing about finishing a project, or what do you find most rewarding?
Well, there's an obvious reward to making something work, right? Especially when you envision something big, right? When you have sort of a big plan in your head and you can sit down and document it and then code it and see it all work and do it in a relatively straightforward amount of time. There's hardly anything better than that satisfaction, than imagining something and bringing it into life, right? Bringing it to life. So that's a hugely rewarding thing, and we can all feel that no matter what we work on. But in the industry, the thing that I was very proud of is sort of having my stamp on products that I know hundreds of millions of people are using, right? Well, Microsoft Word is used by hundreds of millions of people in the world, right? And so when you look at that user base and you think they're using a feature that I affected, I made that feature better, I helped with that thing, I was working during the time we did that, right? So knowing that people all over the world are doing something with some work that I touched is extremely gratifying, right? Because in some way, even though they don't know your name, your impact went all there and there and there, and hundreds of millions of people in all different languages all across the world are using a product that I had a part of.
That's
Right?
interesting.
That's pretty amazing when you know that, now in the old days, right, before this became illegal at Microsoft to do, they would make Easter eggs. So all of the early products that I worked on, they would have a secret way. You had to do this really convoluted thing of click this, click that, double click here, go to this. Like you did a bunch of weird stuff, and then it would come up with this graphical screen and all of our names would scroll. So you could go into Costco or Home Depot or wherever they were showing off, Microsoft software, and you could do your thing, and then you could see your own name show up on this list of everybody who worked on this product. Now, yes, there were a lot of names, so it's not like I was top or something. I was tiny text somewhere in there, but knowing that your name was affixed to that product was pretty darn cool, right?
So your name was actually on one of those things?
Yeah.
That's interesting. Wow, I didn't think
Word, probably Word 2.0, right, or some early versions like that. Yeah, my name was on there, and we could go see it in the code. It was actually in the code, and now they stopped doing that. They decided that was probably a security risk and probably not something we wanted to do, so they don't do them anymore. But that was really cool. That was a real affirmation of your participation in the product. The other thing is, I could go find it somewhere, but Microsoft had these Ship It awards, and every time you shipped a product, you'd get a plaque that goes on this Lucite, monolith. And so you could actually see the projects that you'd worked on and a little plaque for each one of them. So that was a nice thing that, sort of showed that you had been involved in some very material products. So that was
That's
fun.
interesting. That's yeah, I didn't. That's like really fun to get like an actual like little award thing because it's just I don't know, it's fun. It sounds interesting. That's neat. Well then this is kind of opposite a little bit. What are the greatest challenges do you think a programmer faces?
I think for some people, feeling like you're a small cog in a big machine is a hard one, because if you're working on really big software projects, you're working on a very small piece of it. And so it's not like you necessarily have ownership of a huge swath of a product. You worked on a tiny bit of something. And so that can be part of the challenge, to feel like you're fitting in and making enough of a difference, right? Another thing is you can get burnout, because a lot of we've changed a lot in the industry to a very agile kind of model, but agile can be another word for a drumbeat that never ends, right? Because it used to be, again, this is like old days. This is not quite, kids get off my lawn, but it feels like it at this point, right? In the way that we used to develop software, it would take us like 2.5, 3 years to release a version of Word, right? And after we did that, there was this little period of lull where you would take a vacation and the whole team was a little bit more like, yes, you were planning for the next product, but you weren't killing yourself, right? You were kind of a little bit more resting and having a little bit more of a life. And it felt like you could sort of all breathe this collective sigh of relief. And then you would start ramping back up and for the next project, right? So there was this wonderful cycle where you could sort of breathe and get back and then work really hard when you were ready to release. Now, with a lot of the agile development, with the continual release process, the drumbeat really never ends. So every month you owe something, right? So you're always kind of working for the next thing that comes out. And if you're not careful, you can get yourself burned out. Some companies do well at sort of making sure that you're having fun and doing group things, and you're going on outings, and you're sort of having a group esprit de corps with the group to kind of counteract that, where you're at least having social events and you're working together and having fun doing that. So it's possible to counter it, but you can get in this sort of feeling that you're on a hamster wheel and you're never going to get off. So
yeah, that doesn't. So it sounds like burnout is probably the biggest thing. And
burnout is
the biggest
thing.
thing.
Some companies, seem to be known, or in the past have done it. Microsoft used to do it, right? Before they realized that if they kept doing that, they weren't going to have any employees that stuck around. So they finally got smarter. They got smarter about family, understanding about families. They understood about, the fact that you don't need to work this many hours a day, or else you're not going to stick around a long time. So a lot of companies got smarter about that, right?
Yeah, they can't figure out that you can't run them dry forever. Eventually, someone's got to stop.
Yeah, there's only so much blood you're going to wring from the turnip, right? And then you're gonna be done. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So we have. I think we have about time for one more question, and I have one left. It's This is another one from the Discord. Someone said, "Have you ever noticed yourself falling into a rut with programming, aka not doing something the easy way, even though spending some more time can make it a lot more efficient? Would you risk and try to adapt to new changes, or would you settle and stay the safe but less effective route?"
Well, yeah, and this brings up a really interesting point that, the question is not quite asking it, but I kind of want to talk about this thing. There is this idea that some of us fall into, and academically this happens a lot because we're driven for that 4.0. We're sort of driven for the perfection. But there's a phrase that says, don't let the perfect is the enemy of the good. And when you're working in the industry, you don't realize that you're going to have to settle. You're never going to get your project to the exact efficiency and beauty and elegance that you would like. It's not going to happen, right? So at some point you have to find, you have to get your stuff to a certain level where you believe it's pretty darn good, and then you have to let go of it at that point. So always striving for the perfect, most efficient, most elegant thing, actually that'll start driving you insane, right? We had a guy who, right at the time we were shipping a product, wanted to make a fix because he was embarrassed about one little bug that was in his feature. And we said no, right? The people who were running the ship room, the ship decision making said, no, you can't fix that. That's not that important. It's not that big a deal, right? And he was so upset about this because he thought he had let down his customers, and he's like, I want to let them know that I didn't want this and that I would have done better. And it's like, okay, you need to take a vacation and you need to let this go, buddy, right? Because that's not how we're going to do this. And nobody gets to a point of perfection in their code, right? So at some points we have to say, I'm going to get my stuff to where I am very happy with it, but we can actually shoot ourselves in the foot if we try to get perfect, right? And so one of the things that companies sometimes have to teach their employees is, we are not going to wring every bit of performance out of every single bit of code, right? We don't want to be stupid, but we also don't want to spend days and days and days eking out, tiny bits of performance by figuring out how to put all this stuff into fewer bits. And we're just like wringing our hands about every little bit of efficiency and memory. And at some point, stop, right? You just don't have time to do that. We have things to ship. We have stuff going on next month. So at some point, stop with the perfection, stop with everything of efficiency. Now, if we find that the software is being really slow in this particular area, then we go investigate that area and we see what's the bottleneck, what's going on. Let's make that thing more efficient, right? Let's go figure it out. But you can't drive yourself crazy trying to be perfect. So your code is never going to be as elegant or as efficient as you might like. So yeah, you have to let it go. That said, if you go home at night and all night long, you're saying, oh my gosh, I can't live with that. I know that I made that could definitely be done better. Of course, you're going to come do it, right? So you want to do a great job at what you do, but you just can't go absolutely crazy with it, or you'll never ship anything. And no products can ever ship. They all have bugs. They all have imperfections. There's always inelegance. Sorry, that's the nature of the beast, right?
Yeah, I want to say, especially when I was doing stuff, it would be I spend 50% of the time on the first 90%, and that last 10%, I spend the other half. It was correcting and fixing up was a lot of the time, which at certain points, this is stupid.
You can spend another 100% making it perfectly efficient if you want to. I'm going to check every comment, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to reorganize this, and I'm going to sort my functions into alphabetical order, and I'm going to go see if I can store that in one less byte of memory, and I'm going to make that array one more. Okay, you've gone down the rabbit hole, folks. Let it go. Right? You got to let it go at some point. Perfectionists are not necessarily great at, we have to learn to let go. We want to be perfect, but you got to be a little bit careful, because that tendency will drive you insane, right? And they'll have to drag the software out of your hands all the time. And at some point, you just have to say, I did my best. It's pretty darn good. On we go, right? On to something new.
It's better to get something out than nothing at all.
That's right. Yeah.
I think we've got 2 minutes left. I think that's a lot of the big, most important ones. Is there anything else you'd like to say? Anything I missed, or?
I don't know if there's. I'm trying to look and see if there's anything else that was mentioned before. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate everybody being here and the opportunity to talk to you guys and sort of let you know a little bit more about how I think about things. And so it's fun, and so I appreciate the opportunity to be here and kind of be talking about stuff that's not just lectures all the time. So yeah, thanks for the opportunity to just chat for a while.
Yeah, I just want to say, it was a lot of fun having you here. I'm really glad you could make the time, because it's always fun to actually know your professor a little bit more than just talking, because you don't have any time to do this that much, obviously during the lecture. So it's interesting to know more about you just with this interview. It was a lot of fun.
It was fun.
I don't think there's any more questions. So unless I think someone comes to chat, I think we're pretty much finished.
All right. Well, thanks everyone. I appreciate you being here, and thanks for having me. Thanks for hosting, Beck. Nice job with the interview questions.
Thank you, Bill.